Hello and welcome to the webinar tonight. The webinar covering advanced searching using the USA Online Library. So the assumption coming into this webinar is that you already have a basic knowledge of how to use the library's online resources, and that preferably you've already been to one of the monthly basic library webinars that I hold. So just so you know, I won't be covering any basic information in this. So if you're somebody who hasn't been to the library's website or really used some of the resources before, then this would not be the webinar for you because it is geared towards a more advanced audience. So just something to keep in mind. Before we get started, I'm going to ask you to please type in the chat box what degree program that you're in to give me an idea of my audience tonight. Transitional DPT, okay. Thank you, Lisa. Flex is Victoria, I'm guessing that the F is flex. Okay, flex DPT. Okay, so both DPT, one flex, one transitional. So the difference there being, of course, that in the flex program, Victoria does come physically to one of the campuses sometimes, whereas Lisa probably does not come to campus at all. But tonight's focus is really on the electronic resources, so I don't think that'll make a difference either way. So let me introduce myself. My name is Julie Evener. I'm the Director of Library Services for the University of St. Augustine. I have a master's degree in Library and Information Science from the University of South Carolina, and I'm currently pursuing, about halfway done with maybe, an education doctorate in higher education leadership. And I've been with the University of St. Augustine about 6.5 years, something like that. So I'll be teaching this webinar tonight. We're going to start out with, let me skip that. We're going to start off with some learning objectives to get an idea of what we're going to be covering tonight. We're going to talk about identifying useful resources and tools available on the library website. This is a little bit of review from the basic library webinar, but also introducing a few more tools that I didn't go into detail a lot on the basic library webinar. We're going to talk about understanding peer review and how to determine if a particular article is peer reviewed. We're going to talk about PICO and using PICO as a guide in identifying keywords for a database search. We're going to do a mesh search in PubMed, and I'll show you how to do a mesh search and also when you might want to do a mesh search. We're going to talk about using advanced search tactics and also just review again how to go about requesting the full text of an article through our interlibrary loan service if it's not available immediately through our library. Okay, so we're going to start out with some of the tools and resources available to you on the library's website. Grammarly, now this is one that I talk about whenever I get a chance, basically. Grammarly is a great free software available through the library. You can find information on it right on the main page of the library as well as on the referencing page of the library's website. It's free software when you register with your USA email address, and it does a number of really useful things. It's called Grammarly, so you can probably guess that one of the things it does is checks proofreads in your paper, essentially. Anything that you upload to it, it'll proofread, it'll give you suggestions on word choice and tense and all those different things like that. Avoiding passive voice, it has one notification or notation in there on that. So that's one of the really great things that it does. It also is a really good tool to use as a plagiarism self-check. So I don't have exact statistics on this, but most plagiarism is unintentional. And Grammarly is a great tool to use to, if you run your paper through Grammarly before you submit it, then you'll be able to find and fix any potential plagiarism issues before it's sort of official, right? Officially turned in. So those are the two main things Grammarly is really great for. They also have a plugin. I think it does not yet work on Macs, but it does work on PCs, that you can basically download a plugin to Microsoft Word so that Grammarly works within your Microsoft Word document, saving you the step of uploading your document or copying and pasting your text to Grammarly. So Grammarly is a great tool. I use it all the time. And like I said, just a great tool to use, and I highly recommend it. Especially since, as of right now, our university doesn't have any sort of writing center or anything like that. Grammarly, it's obviously automated, it's software, it's not a real person looking at your paper, but it's sort of the next best thing. So sort of in conjunction with that, the information on this is also available on the referencing page of the library's website. We have citation style guides on that page for both AMA and APA style. So as both of you are in physical therapy programs, you'll be using primarily AMA style for your work and your courses. And so also want to tell you that in addition to the library citation style guide, which gives some examples and formatting for some of the more common types of sources, the library also provides full text access to the entire AMA Manual of Style online. So you can actually look at any page, any section of the AMA manual online as an ebook through the library, and you can connect to that a couple of places right there on the AMA style guide provided by the library, which again is on the referencing page of the library's website. You could also look for it in the library catalog or Search USA. If you search for the AMA Manual of Style, you'll get to a link that you can click on to go to the ebook version of the AMA Manual of Style. So that's a good resource. Obviously, if you're just looking at something, just need a quick how do I format a citation for an online journal or something like that, then the style guide might be quicker. But if you have a more in-depth question that our basic style guide doesn't cover, the AMA manual, the full manual, is going to be your go-to source. That's the authority, the only authority on AMA style. So I highly recommend using that as well. And finally, I wanted to mention citation management tools and citation generators. So these are all listed here. Again, these are also listed on the referencing page of the library's website with some links to tutorials and videos and things like that for using these resources. But four of the more commonly used free citation management tools: RefMe, Zotero, Quicken, and Mendeley. So you've probably heard of or even used some other citation management tools before, like RefWorks, EndNote, things like that. Those are subscription-based and they do cost money. The ones listed up here are free. So I can tell you that I personally use Zotero. I mentioned I'm working on a doctorate, and I use Zotero for all of the work that I need to do for that. And I think it works great, and it doesn't cost me anything. So I highly recommend it. It's really easy to use, especially if you're going to be using Firefox to do your research, because Zotero has a toolbar plugin for Firefox where if you're on the page, looking at the abstract of an article or something like that, there's just a button that you click up on your toolbar to automatically save it to your Zotero library. So very convenient. So let me clarify that RefMe is a citation generator, whereas Zotero, Quicken, and Mendeley are all citation management tools. So the difference is that with a citation management tool, you can save articles, categorize them, tag them. It organizes your sources. And then you can it'll also generate your citation list for you. Most of them have plugins to Microsoft Word, something like that. Zotero definitely does, Mendeley does. Whereas RefMe will just generate the citations. It's not a tool to organize and store all of your sources, but it will generate the citation, and it's really useful for doing that. They have an app like you can do on a smartphone, and if you're citing a book, for example, you can scan the barcode of the book with your smartphone, and RefMe will automatically generate the citation. So it makes it a lot quicker to get the correctly cited format, the correctly formatted citation. So these are all good. I definitely recommend them, especially as you go into working on, a major capstone paper or something like that. These are going to be really useful for keeping track of all of your sources, and you can save things to your library in each of these as you go looking things up. So citation management tools and citation generation. And again, more information and links to these are on the referencing page of the library's website. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears now, and we're going to talk about peer review. Let me actually stop first and ask any questions about what we've covered so far. Okay, no questions. Okay, so let's talk about peer review. So peer review, it might be something you're familiar with already. It's a common term when you're talking about articles. Most likely you've heard it used in the frame of a classroom assignment, maybe, where you're told to find peer-reviewed articles on a certain topic, something like that. But let me tell you a little bit more about what goes into that and what these different terms mean. So you might have heard the term scholarly articles, peer-reviewed articles, or refereed articles. So what's the difference, right? So not all scholarly articles are peer-reviewed. Something could be a journal that's about a scholarly topic, an article on a scholarly topic with references and all of that, but it's not necessarily peer-reviewed. So scholarly is a larger category than peer-reviewed. Everything peer-reviewed is going to be scholarly, but not everything scholarly is going to be peer-reviewed. And then peer-reviewed and refereed mean the same thing. So these are sort of in the other category. So we've got scholarly articles, which includes peer-reviewed articles, and then the other category is trade publications. This is more like magazines. So a scholarly publication is more called a journal, whereas a trade publication is more called like a magazine. So an example of that, and this one works well for my PT audience tonight, is PT in Motion, published by the APTA, is a magazine. It's not a peer-reviewed journal, it's a trade publication, versus the other publication or another publication that the APTA puts out, Physical Therapy, is a peer-reviewed journal. So if you if you're members of the APTA and you can kind of look at those two side by side, you can see some of the differences in a scholarly peer-reviewed journal versus a trade publication or a magazine like PT in Motion. One of the big differences, if you're looking at the physical copies of them, are there's a lot of physical differences. So there's a lot of ads in trade publications, some page ads as big as an entire page, taking up an entire page. The pages are usually very glossy or glossier anyway, with a lot of visual sorts of things, whereas the physical copy, a print copy of a scholarly journal, is going to be more boring, I guess, a lot more text. The pages are going to not be glossy or anything like that. It's not, trying to be aesthetically pleasing. So those are some examples of the differences there. So what does peer-reviewed or refereed actually mean? It means that a panel of experts has looked over the article usually a research study or something like that. They're looking at things like the methodology. Is it a sound methodology that they're using? Do the results make sense based on the methodology? Those sorts of things. They're basically just checking to make sure that it's a reliable study, that the research study is reliable. So when somebody submits something to a peer-reviewed journal, if the topic sounds like something the journal wants to publish, they send it to a peer review board, a panel of experts who then look at it. And oftentimes what they'll do is they'll come back and say, okay, if you make these changes, then we can publish it. And so then the authors would make those changes and it can get published. So I want to emphasize that there have been, and you can see published cases of this, articles published in peer-reviewed journals that are later found to be flawed, very flawed, or plagiarized, those sorts of things. So you can't think of peer review as a guarantee. You have to think of it, it's a stamp of approval because this group, panel of experts has looked at it, but it's not a foolproof stamp of approval. You would definitely want to still review the article for yourself, make sure that it looks, the methodology and everything is sound from your point of view before you based any, major clinical decisions on it or, anything like that. So that's something good to keep in mind, that peer review is not any sort of a guarantee. Especially since there's not any universal standards for what peer-reviewed means. The panel of experts could be 2 people, it could be 5 people. There's lots of different ways of doing peer review, and so there's no peer review what actually goes into peer review can differ depending on what journal it is. And most journals will, if you look on their websites, will say what their peer review process is, and they'll tell you more about how that works, and you can kind of judge whether it's a rigorous process or not. Along with that, the journal's website will also tell you whether the journal is peer-reviewed or not. Usually peer review is a big selling point for a journal. People are looking for peer-reviewed journals and articles from peer-reviewed journals. So if they're peer-reviewed, they're going to tell you that on their website. They're going to be proud of it. So usually their website will list will say something out. If you go to like an About This Journal section of their website, they'll say that, this is a peer-reviewed journal. You can also, in most databases, filter by peer-reviewed. Some of them will give you a filter for scholarly and peer-reviewed sometimes. And so just remember that scholarly is going to be casting a wider net than peer-reviewed, and they don't mean the same thing. Peer-reviewed is a more narrow, rigorous process than something being considered in the category of scholarly. And also keep in mind that, so peer review applies, the term peer review would apply to the entire journal. So if something is published in a peer-reviewed journal, then it's considered peer-reviewed as far as the research studies go. Some exceptions might be if there's an editorial in a peer-reviewed journal or a book review or something like that. Those things wouldn't be considered peer-reviewed articles, but the research studies would. Any questions about peer review? Okay. So then what we're going to talk about now, switching gears again, we're going to be talking about one of the questions that I get most often is, or one of the challenges that students share with me most often is that they're just not sure how to go from their topic to words that they can put into a database to do a database search. And that can definitely be tricky. One of the tactics that I recommend is called PICO. PICO is used for other things as well. You've probably heard of it before in one of your courses or another. I think it's usually applied to things like research questions and things like that in a clinical environment. It's the same Pico, but I've sort of adapted it a little bit to be a good tool for isolating your keywords for a database search. And I'll talk a little bit after this about another tactic because there's kind of a difference. So Pico is a really good one to use if you've got a specific clinical scenario in mind and you want to break it down and find out what are the most important pieces of this for me to pull out and use as my keywords in a database search. After we talk about Pico, I'm also going to mention a different tactic, sort of a strategic tactic that will help if you're doing something very thorough, if you're doing a very thorough literature search, for example, for a dissertation or something like that. Pico could be a starting place for that, but it's not going to be exhaustive enough. Pico is really designed as a way to get your initial search that you do to be as efficient and effective as possible so that you get the most reliable and relevant results sort of right away without having to do a lot of digging. But the whole point of a thorough literature search is to dig, so you have to use a little bit different tactic there. So anyway, so Pico, the P stands for the patient or population, the or problem, sorry, patient, population, or problem. The I is the intervention or the treatment. The C is if there's any comparison, if you're comparing two specific interventions. And the O is the outcome. Now, there's a little bit of confusion I see sometimes on that. The outcome is going to be essentially ask yourself, what is the goal of the intervention? As a result of the intervention, what do you want to happen? And that's the outcome that you're looking for. So to give you an example, so if you have the research question, is manual therapy an effective treatment for rehabilitation of low back pain in the elderly? So what is the patient, population, or problem, the P in this question? Elderly low back pain, yeah. So Lisa put elderly low back pain, which is correct because you've kind of got to pull out, you've got information in this about the population, which is elderly, but you also have information about what the problem is, and the problem is low back pain. So elderly low back pain would be sort of the complete P for this. And what about the I, the intervention? Manual therapy, yes, is the intervention here. Do we have a comparison in this? Are we directly comparing manual therapy to another specific kind of intervention? No, there is no comparison in this case, and there's not always going to be a comparison. If I was specifically looking at manual therapy versus exercise as a treatment, for example, then my comparison, my C would be exercise. But in this case, there's no information about wanting to directly compare, so we can just leave the C blank. There is no comparison in this case. And what's the outcome that we're looking for? Okay, Victoria says rehab. Yes, the end result, we want this patient to be rehabilitated, right? We want him or her to be able to, not have that back pain and to be able to basically restore as much as possible of that how it was before, how her back was before the pain was a problem. So yeah, rehabilitation. And the O is challenging for people sometimes because you really want to think about something concrete. But it could be something general like rehabilitation, or it could be something general like reduced pain, something like that. So in this case, I think rehabilitation is the best one. So what we're going to literally do is pull exactly those words that we just listed: elderly, low back pain, manual therapy, rehabilitation, and these are our keywords. So these are going to be the keywords that are going to work well in almost any database for us. So that's just a, like I was saying, just a way to really isolate and think about it and say, well, what are the most important points of this topic? And those are the most important points are, of course, the ones you would want to search for. Now, again, this is good for coming up with your first search. If you're doing multiple searches for a thorough literature search, something like that, you're going to be doing more work based on this. For example, what you would want to do at that point is be very strategic. So you'd want to say, okay, these are my main keywords. Now, what synonyms or related topics can I think about for each of these keywords? Let me jump over to this document here. So I've got this section here in this document that I wrote for dissertation students. So it says chunk your keywords into concepts, which we've done. We've got elderly, low back pain, manual therapy, rehabilitation. So then you would want to set up kind of each of those words as a column and then write down as many synonyms or as many related sorts of terms as you can under each one. So you can see I've done that here with critical thinking, nursing, and students. There's a different example, obviously, in this. And so once you have that sort of a chart, then you want to combine. So you want to take one term from each column and put them together in all different combinations and do different searches. So again, let me emphasize that this is for if you're doing a thorough literature search, something like you're doing for a dissertation, something like that, where the goal is to really find everything on that topic. That's very iterative process. So you're going to be doing a lot of searches with the different combinations of keywords and things like that. So I just wanted to mention that. You're going to have multiple search strings that you're going to use in multiple databases if you're doing a very thorough literature search. If you're not doing a very thorough literature search, if you're looking for the most recent research to make a clinical decision or for most class assignments, things like that, the one search that you do based on your PICO terms should get you enough results that it should be enough. It should be sufficient. In many cases, I'm not going to say in all cases, but in many cases. So now I want to actually go in and try these keywords that we did, and we're going to try them in Search USA, and then we're going to move over to PubMed to talk about mesh searching. But we'll start in Search USA. Let it load here. Here it goes. Okay, so as you probably know, Search USA is a easy and convenient tool for searching many databases at once. It includes a lot of our library resources all in one place, not completely everything because of some proprietary things, but most of our resources all in one place so you can do one search and get results from multiple databases. Whenever you go to Search USA, the first thing you always want to do is go to this yellow bar across the top, click on it, and log in right away. Search USA will let you do a search without being logged in, but it will not let you click on anything, see abstracts or full text or anything like that if you're not logged in. So just like all the library resources, you log in with your USA email address and the same password you use to access your USA email account. Okay, now the yellow bar is gone, so I'm logged in. So our keywords were elderly, low back pain, manual therapy, rehabilitation. So I'm just going to type them in just like that, no commas, no words in between them, stop words or connector words like Boolean. If you've heard the term Boolean searching or Boolean terms, most modern databases don't really need those. They sort of assume that they're there. So we're not going to use anything like that. We're just going to put that string of just those main keywords. Okay, so we get quite a few results here. And I'm not going to go in completely all of the different options here in Search USA because, again, that's something that's covered more in the basic webinar. But I am going to mention, here's that limiter for peer-reviewed. And if you click on Show More, I think there's also, oh, actually, it's down here. I don't know what I just did. We'll see. Okay. If you go, so under limit to, you can limit it to peer reviewed. Under source types, you can do academic journals. And just remember that peer reviewed is a subset of academic journals. There's going to be more academic journals than there are going to be peer reviewed. But all the peer reviewed are going to be from academic journals. So you can apply the academic journals one. You can go right to the full text. This should be all review. You can, if there are any on this front page, you can click to request through interlibrary loan and fill out the form, your first name, last name, and email address to request something that's not available immediately through our library. So what I want to show you, we're going to move into PubMed here because I want to talk about mesh searching in PubMed. First, I do want to mention, though, the widgets over here on the right-hand side of the page. The PubMed one is the one we're about to use, but I wanted to point out there's also one for the ProQuest Dissertations and Theses Global Database. ProQuest has some proprietary issues with allowing their results to be in Search USA, so their results do not show up in Search USA. So you do have to do that search separately, but we've tried to make it easy by putting the widget here. So if you click on the widget, it'll automatically run your search with the same keywords in the ProQuest Dissertations database. So it's still an extra step, but it's not as many extra steps as if you had to go separately to that database and that sort of a thing. The PubMed one does the same thing. PubMed results do come up in Search USA, but PubMed has some really great advanced search features that you can't do with Search USA, and so I think it definitely merits being searched separately. So if we go and click on that, as I mentioned, it's going to automatically take our same keywords and run that search. So you can see we get a lot fewer results right off the bat than we did in Search USA. Part of that reason is because it's one database versus a lot of databases all mashed together. And also because Search USA, remember, includes books. It includes, I mean, we put on the peer-reviewed limiter, but so it shouldn't anymore. None of these results should be books, but it'll include a lot more kinds of things, whereas PubMed is only going to include peer-reviewed articles. So that's something you might notice in PubMed, is that there is no filter or limiter for peer-reviewed. You can't say in PubMed, like we did in Search USA, click a box to see only the peer-reviewed. And that's because everything in PubMed is from a peer-reviewed journal. That's all that they'll put in the database. There's nothing, it doesn't have any trade publications or anything like that. They're all peer-reviewed. So that's why you don't see that as an option to filter in PubMed. Basic kind of stuff in PubMed, of course, is the filters over here. You can customize by article type. You can say you only want to see all these different options here. You can say you only want to see systematic reviews, or you only want to see randomized controlled trials, which are two of the best kinds of evidence out there. So you can just click on this, and now we're only seeing the systematic reviews on this topic. I'm going to clear that though. You can also see publication dates. You can filter by publication date, things like that. So these are really good. The article types filter is one of the reasons that I think PubMed deserves to be searched on its own, because that's not something that you can do in Search USA. You can't get that specific where it will reliably limit your results to only one very specific kind of health sciences article. So definitely worth it. But what I want to talk about is mesh searching. So actually, ironically, in this particular search, I don't think we would need to do a mesh search because we only have 232 results, which is a manageable number of results. It's not thousands, for example. So when you have a manageable number of results and you look through the results and most of the ones, especially on the first couple of pages, look pretty relevant, then you probably don't need to do a mesh search. If, however, you're doing your search and you're getting, 1,000+ results, and you're looking at your results the first few pages and it's really hit or miss, it's like, well, this one's good, but this one's not really what I'm looking for. If you're not getting that relevancy toward the beginning of your search results, or if you're getting a lot of results, more than you can manage to look through, then a mesh search can be really useful. So what do I mean by a mesh search? Let me jump back to the PowerPoint for a second here. So MESH stands for medical subject headings. So this is what I always like to do here. So we've got this nice picture here. What do you call this beverage in the picture? Soda? That's what I call it too, Lisa. My husband says pop. Both of you say soda. See, that doesn't work as well when we all say the same thing. But my husband says pop. I live in Florida, and so in Florida and some other parts of the Deep South, no matter what kind of soda it is, it's Coke. Especially like in Georgia, around Atlanta, where Coca-Cola is headquartered. So there's different terms that all refer to the same thing, right? So all of these, I think even there's a part where they call it tonic. Is that like up in Boston area or something? But anyway, very interesting, right? We have different words that all mean the same thing. So I could be talking about soda, my husband could be talking about pop, but we mean the exact same thing. And this extends to more than just soda. It extends to all different sorts of concepts, even in health sciences, even in some of these keywords that we've identified tonight. So the issue that comes up then is if you're doing a search in a database and you're saying that you want to see articles that are about soda, for example, if you say soda and you say you want to see the articles about soda, maybe the effects of soda on children's health or something like that, that would fit into a PubMed search. What if there's an article that talks about the effects of soft drinks on children's health? That would be a really relevant article. But if you're not using that terminology, if you're saying soda instead of soft drinks or something like that, would the article come up in your results? Maybe, but maybe it would be farther down. So the answer to this in most databases, and PubMed does it better than most, is to have what's called controlled vocabulary. So all that means is that people who are behind this database, the people who program this database, have put together a sort of a master list of terms, and it's basically said, okay, in this database, this term is going to be the official term for this concept. So for example, in PubMed, there actually is a MESH term, medical subject heading term. MESH is what they call their controlled vocabulary. There actually is a MESH term for the concept of soda, and they actually use carbonated beverage is what they use. So the people behind PubMed, they created this list of master terms, and they said, okay, whenever we talk about soda in PubMed, we're going to use the term carbonated beverage. And so then they have, whenever new articles go into PubMed, there are human indexers. These are actual human beings, it's not done by a computer, who look at the article and they assign it some of these official terms based on what the article's about. So even if nowhere in the abstract it says carbonated beverage, If it just says soda, soft drinks, something like that, this human indexer will look at this article and say, oh, this article is about carbonated beverages, and they'll list that as one of the subject headings, the mesh terms for that article. So that helps the database to know that all of these terms mean the same thing, essentially. So I hope that made sense. It can get a little bit tricky trying to explain this, so I think it might be easier. Let me show you. So we did our search in PubMed, right? We got 232 results, which again, I think is a manageable number, but we could get that down even to an even smaller number by using mesh terms here. So a couple of ways that you can find out what the mesh term is for your concepts. That's what we're going to be doing here, by the way. We're going to be taking each of our concepts that we're searching for. We're going to find out what is the official mesh term for this concept, and then we're going to do a search based on that mesh term. So when I did a search for elderly low back pain manual therapy rehabilitation, what PubMed did, how they interpreted that, is that they're looking for, and you can even see there's a search details box on here. So you can see they were looking for this term in all fields. So that means if these terms showed up in the title, if they showed up in the abstract, if they showed up in the list of mesh terms, if they showed up in the title of the journal, in, for some reason, the authors, maybe one of the authors' last name is Manual, I don't know. But if it showed up any place in the record for the article, any of these places here, any place in the article, then it's going to be included in your list of results. When we do a mesh search, instead of looking everywhere, it's only going to look in the list of mesh terms that has been assigned to that article. So it narrows down what part of the record it's looking in, and it's only going to, so what that results in is only getting the most relevant things up toward the top. Because an abstract could mention the word elderly, but that's not really what the article is all about. And so the mesh terms identify what that article is primarily actually about. So to do this, we're going to come up here. So there's a couple things you can do actually. So if we start at this PubMed home screen, you can just go right here to Mesh Database and click on that. If you're already in PubMed though, you can just click on this downward arrow and select Mesh. The only thing that changes is that Mesh is showing up here instead of PubMed, and that means you're searching the Mesh database now instead of PubMed. The Mesh database is simply that master list of official terms that PubMed uses. So our first keyword was elderly, so we're going to put that in. And again, this isn't a way to find out what are the synonyms or what other ways are there of saying elderly. This is, okay, the keyword that I came up with was elderly, but what does PubMed call elderly? So we're trying to translate our language into PubMed's language. So what does PubMed call elderly? So we get a few results here. Aged is the top one. Housing for the elderly, that's not really what we're looking for. Frail elderly, maybe, but we didn't really have anything in our scenario that indicated it was that specific. So we can look at these other ones here, but it really looks like aged is going to be our best bet. It gives a definition, a person 65 through 79 years of age, which is very specific. So we didn't have in our scenario how old this person was, but if we knew that, then we could look at it more specifically. There's apparently a mesh term, aged 80 and over, that we could use instead if our patient was 80 or over. But for this case, we're just going to put a check mark next to aged, and we're going to add it to the search builder. So what this tells me is that the mesh term for elderly is aged. So that is the mesh term for our keyword elderly that we came up with. So now that I've got aged over here in my PubMed search builder, I'm going to look for my next concept, which was, hold on, let me flip back in my notes here. low back pain. So that's our next one. So since that's a concept that all goes together, we're going to search for it all together. Okay, so this looks different, right? It came up looking a little bit different. When we searched for elderly, we got a list, and this one just brings us to this page that has low back pain at the top. So why did it do that? It did that because there is only one possible mesh term for low back pain, and that's low back pain. For elderly, it could have been several different things. So we got a list of all of our options. But for low back pain, there's really only one match for that. And this is also a case where the keyword that we came up with is the same thing as the mesh term. So in this case, we're speaking the same language as PubMed naturally. There's no translation that we need to do necessarily, because what the word that we thought of matches the word that PubMed considers the official term. So low back pain, if we want to make sure this is what we're looking for, we can read the definition. Other interesting things that you can see on here, entry terms are synonyms for this mesh term. So if somebody was to do a mesh, search in that mesh database for low back aches, low back pain would come up, or any of these other terms. So this is PubMed's way of saying, okay, I know that all of these terms mean the same thing as low back pain, but low back pain is going to be the official term that we use in PubMed. So that's what that means. Also, some neat things you can see on here. There are hierarchy trees. These are kind of cool. This is where you can see back pain is a more general category than low back pain, so it's above it. And in both cases, but they've got different, where do they start diverging here? Nervous system diseases versus signs and symptoms of pathological conditions is what it is. So they fit. So low back pain fits into two different hierarchy trees, and you can kind of see how that goes. So by default, if we do a search for back pain, for example, by default we'll see all of the results for low back pain, but also any other more specific headings that would be under back pain. So you always want to use the most specific one possible to limit your results more. Okay, so up here as well, these are subheadings. So these can come in handy sometimes. I always like to do, when I'm doing a mesh search, the first time I do it, I won't use subheadings. And then if I'm still not seeing the results that I want, I might go back and add subheadings at that point. But it's not always necessary to use them, but they do come in handy sometimes. So this is where one of these specific terms will be tied to low back pain in your search. Rehabilitation is one of them, which could be useful in this search if we still get a lot of results after our mesh search. Psychology, radiography, history, genetics, ethnology, so all different choices here. For this example, I'm going to not add any subheadings, and I'm just going to add low back pain to the search builder. So before, when we had the list of all the possible mesh terms, we had to put a check mark next to age to add it to the search builder. In this case, because this whole page is about the mesh term low back pain, we don't have to check mark anything. We just put add to search builder, and it shows up there. Okay, our next term was manual therapy. So now we're going to look for that one. So the mesh term for manual therapy is musculoskeletal manipulations. All of the same stuff that we saw on the low back pain page, we'll see on this one too. Entry terms and a couple of hierarchy trees, subheadings, things like that. So we're just going to add this to search builder. And our final term was rehabilitation. So we're going to look for that one. So this is another one like elderly where we have multiple things that it could be. You see the rehabilitation subheading is here, but our first result is just rehabilitation by itself, and it defines it as the restoration of human functions to the maximum degree possible in a person or persons suffering from disease or injury. So that sounds like very much what we want the outcome to be for our patient, right? Because he or she had low back pain, we're going to try some manual therapy, and the end goal of that is that hopefully the restoration of the normal function for that person to the maximum degree possible. So that's probably the one we want to use, but we can look at some of the other examples here, other options here rather, look at their definitions and see if any of those maybe fit better. I don't think they do in this case, so I'm going to put a check mark next to rehabilitation and add it to the search builder. Also note that if you wanted to see the subheadings and entry terms and hierarchy trees for anything on this list, you could just click on it and that would take you to that page about that mesh term, basically the dictionary entry, so to speak, for that term. So we've entered in all of our terms. We found the mesh, corresponding mesh terms for all of the keywords that we came up with. They're all over here in the search builder. So now I can click Search PubMed. And remember, it's only going to be looking in the mesh list assigned to these articles. So it's not looking for these terms in the title or the abstract or anything like that, only in the mesh subject heading list. So now we're down to 23 results, which is, if 200 and something was manageable, then 23 is definitely manageable. And we can look through these here and see they should all be very relevant to what we're looking for. If we click on one of them, I can show you here. If you click, this is the list of mesh terms that have been assigned to this article. So we should see all of ours here. We've got low back pain, we've got aged, we've got, what was that other one, musculoskeletal? Anyway, this should all be here. So these are all relevant things. So you can see the list of the mesh terms. One thing I want to mention about a mesh search is that since these are actual, I mentioned that there's an actual person who's assigning these mesh terms to the articles. So because of that, there's usually a delay. That's a slower process because it's not automated. And so one of the downsides to doing a mesh search is you're not going to get the very newest articles. They might even be, it might take them even 2 or 3 months to assign mesh terms to an article. And since a mesh search in this way is only looking at this mesh terms list, if there is no mesh terms list, that article is not going to come up in your results because there's no matches there because there's nothing in that mesh terms list. So if you're looking for like the brand new, EPUB ahead of print, before print publication, it was just put online yesterday sort of articles, a mesh search is not going to find those. So you would also probably want to do your keyword search too to see the most recent ones, even if you have to sort through a little bit more of them. But a mesh search is going to really narrow your results down to see only the most relevant ones. Questions about mesh searching? Is the term range of motion similar to low back pain in that it is recognized? I'm not sure what you mean by recognized. Are you wondering what the mesh term for range of motion is? Because we can look that up pretty easily here. So it looks like the mesh term for range of motion is range of motion, comma, articular. Okay, good. That answers her question. And you could do that with any term that you think of. If you want to know what the official MESH term is for any term that you think of, just look it up in the MESH database here. Just change this from PubMed to MESH, type in your term, hit search, and you can find out what the official MESH term is for that item, for that term, the concept or the keyword that you came up with. So the idea here is, sometimes the words that you come up with on your own are going to be the same as the official terms that PubMed uses, and sometimes they're not. And so you really just want to find out whether that's the case, or you basically want to translate the language that you're speaking into the language that PubMed is speaking. And from there you can use PubMed's own language, because you'll get better results if you're speaking the same language as the database, essentially. Okay. So I want to go over now, let me jump back to the PowerPoint. I want to go over some advanced search tips. One of the more basic advanced search tips, is that an oxymoron? I don't know, but is you want to look at the works cited list of resources that you've already found. So if you've done this PubMed search and you found a really great article, go to the works cited list. You want to look through that works cited list and see what resources that author used or that researcher used to support his or her claims. And those are also probably good sources for you. The opposite of that, sort of the inverse of that, is something called shepardizing or citation indexing. And that is when you have an article and you say, well, who has cited this article? If you find this good article, who has cited that? So checking the works cited list would help you move backwards in time, and shepardizing will help you move forwards in time. So obviously shepardizing is going to work best when you have an article that's a little bit older. If it was something published last month, for example, probably nobody has had time to cite it yet. But if it was published a couple years ago or even longer ago, then probably people have had time to cite it. One of the times this comes in really handy is if you've got a seminal article on the topic. If this is like the article that everyone talks about when they talk about this subject matter, this topic, then shepardizing that can give you some really useful results. I'm going to show you an example of this. Actually, let me do it this way. So let me find an example to use. One of the best tools, free tools that I found to do citation indexing is actually Google Scholar. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to find, this looks good. I'm going to use this article. It's from 2010, so it should be old enough that people have cited it. And I'm going to go to Google Scholar. So what you want to do is you go to Google Scholar. And by the way, if you didn't know, you can connect your Google Scholar account to our library, and then you can see automatic links. If an article comes up in Google Scholar that is available through our library, you can click on a Find at USA link to get to it immediately. On the library's website, there's a video for how to do that. It involves this settings tab here. I won't go into it other than to mention that. So you're in Google Scholar. You want to copy the title of the article that you want to shepardize, and then you paste it in and click search. So it comes up here. Here's that Find at USA link I was mentioning when you link your Google Scholar account to our library. And underneath the article, you'll see it says cited by 5. So actually for something published in 2010, not very many people have cited it yet. But we can click here on cited by 5, and it lists all 5 things that Google Scholar has found that cite this original article that we looked for. Now Google Scholar does a good job of finding most of the things that have cited it. I wouldn't assume that it's an exhaustive list. And it also finds some strange things sometimes. So just because Google Scholar is listing it as something that has cited that article, you always want to double check what kind of resource is one of the ones listed here. Is that one is this a peer-reviewed article on its own? Or, is it, sometimes they get some weird things. Google Scholar finds some strange things sometimes. So you just want to make sure that whatever resource you're looking at is a good one, a reliable one. because you don't have that guarantee on Google Scholar like you do in PubMed that everything's going to be reliable. So that's kind of a neat trick. And you can even, now that we're here, if I've done articles before where I get hundreds of results when I do the cited by. And in that case, it might be useful to click this here where it says search within citing articles, and now I can search specific elderly, or something like that, something that I wanted to see specifically. And with 5, you don't really have to do that. But if you've got hundreds of results and they're all kind of all over the place, you can use that tool to narrow them down a little bit. I know that we're short on time, so I'm going to just go through these last points really quick here. This whole process of going backwards and forwards in time based on articles is called pearl gathering. That's the term that I use for it, because you're kind of, or pearl hunting is used as well, because you're kind of going through and trying to find those pearls of, the good information sort of a thing, and it's a process. So consider that, let me jump back over here. Consider that in the Google Scholar shepherdizing search that we did, it brings up all of these articles, and you'll see each of these articles, you can do cited by on each of these articles. And each of these articles have works cited lists that you can also look through. So each article you find gives you possibilities that point you towards another article, which can point you towards another article. And it can be kind of a never-ending string of jumping from resource to resource. So that's an advanced search tip, because you can use the resources you've already found to help you find more resources. You can also use synonyms, alternate names, similar conditions, etc., if the terms you're using are proving unsuccessful. So this is similar to doing something like MESH, where you would want to, for example, one of the things that I see a lot is abbreviations, right? We like abbreviations in health sciences. So if you're abbreviating a term, maybe unabbreviate it and do your search with it spelled out. And that might be more recognizable in the database that you're using than the abbreviation for it. Something like AIDS is a pretty common, people use AIDS more than they use the full spelled out version. So something like that is probably fine to use an abbreviation, but some of the more arcane ones, you might not be, I can't think of an example right off the top of my head, but it might not be as useful to use those. So if that's the case, spell it out or try it both ways and see. So that's another tip for you there. I just wanted to mention again, article requests or interlibrary loan, sort of interchangeable terms, that if there's ever anything that you find, an article or book chapter or anything like that that you find that is not immediately available through our library, all you have to do is request it. One of the easier ways to do that is to use Search USA. If you copy and paste the article title into Search USA, it'll either give you a link to connect to the full text, or it'll give you a link to request it through interlibrary loan. If you don't necessarily want to do that, then you can also just send an email to library@usa.edu with the full citation for the article that you need, or articles that you need. Remember, there's no limits and no cost to doing article requests. So definitely do that. It's really quick. Our average is about 3 business days, and a lot of the time we actually can return articles to students within 24 hours a lot of the time. So please don't hesitate to use that service. It's part of our overall goal as a library is to make sure that you have all the resources that you need. And this is one of the ways that we do that. All right, we're a few minutes over. I apologize for that, but I am done. But I will stay on and answer any questions that you have. If you've got to run or you can't think of a question right now, but you think of one later, this is my contact information. The library@usa.edu account doesn't go to me directly. It goes to all of our librarians and library staff, and any of them can answer questions for you as well. So don't hesitate to email that, and see my office hours are listed there. And if you email library@usa.edu, then you'll get somebody even when I'm not in the office. So that's a good one to use to get a quick response from the library. And now I'm going to be done talking. If you have any questions, I'll hang around for a few more minutes. Otherwise, have a great night.